So since we have 1 minute, won't take any of our time and go ahead and just get started with some introductions. This is, and as I say your name, wave, Tim Nutt, there he is, and Tom Dillard. And they have I'm going to let them tell you about it, but they have Thursdays with Tom and Tim. As their usual program, but we have kidnapped them today at noon on Wednesday for a special edition from the LifeQuest Facebook page. And we are so glad to have our Zoomers watching with us today, and then our Facebookers watching from our Facebook page. Both of these guys are historians, archivists, natural storytellers, which you'll see in a moment. And I am just going to let them tell you a little bit more about how they got started with this, and then about their special guest that they have with them today. Thank you for being here, guys.
Thank you, Leah.
Thanks. Looking forward to it. LifeQuest is an important institution and certainly has my support.
Well, just a little background for those who are not familiar with Third Thursdays with Tom and Tim, and today is a special date and special time. I wanted to put, when we were doing publicity for those maybe my age or maybe a little younger, I wanted to put a very special episode harkening back to those things that you would hear on TV. But we started this earlier this year in January, and Tom and I have been talking about doing a web show for off and on, I guess, for a couple of months now, and before we started. And so we just put it together, and it's the third Thursday of every month. And we have, we talk about some sort of topic in Arkansas history, and then we have a guest each month.
The idea, the philosophy behind our program is that Arkansas has a lot of interesting history. We're both historians, but we're interested in the broader aspects of Arkansas studies, such as art and the economy and political science and all sorts of stuff. But we don't, this program is not going to be definitive history in any way. This is just an opportunity for us to talk about aspects of Arkansas that are both informative and hopefully fun too.
Mm-hmm. It's basically just to nurture our geekiness.
Well, it's nerd fun.
Nerd fun, sure. Yeah. Well, when Leah approached us about doing a special episode of Third Thursdays with Tom and Tim, Tom and I talked, and we were trying to come up with a topic. And so we settled on Arkansas music today. And of course, that's a large topic. There's no way that we'd be able to really do justice to that in this short amount of time. But I thought it was interesting. A friend of mine sent me a link to the New Yorker, the new issue of the New Yorker, and it had a little snippet in there about an Arkansas singer who had just come out with a new CD, and her name is, I think I'm pronouncing this right, Yebba, Yebba.
That's her performance name.
That's her performance name, and it's actually her real name is Abigail Smith. She's from West Memphis. And she goes by Abby, and so Yebba is Abby spelled backwards. Well,
I'm afraid I missed Yebba in my listening.
I had not heard of Yebba before this friend of mine sent it to me.
It's when you get into topics like music, it is so vast. Arkansas is a small state, three degrees of separation, basically. But yet there's so much to tell, and music is one of those huge areas. I would like to say that there's no way that we can do anything today that's going to be in any way really representative of aspects of Arkansas musical history, but we can plant some seeds. We can bring up some people that we think are particularly interesting, and maybe in a couple of cases that we have some experience with. We're going to be talking about Emma Dusenberry to begin with.
So Emma Dusenberry, I remember when I first learned about Emma Dusenberry, and she's really a fascinating person, sort of she was discovered of this woman who knew and sang all these traditional songs, and she was discovered in Mina in the 20s.
Yeah, why don't we see a picture of her?
That's a good idea. Let me share my screen, and you would think after all this time that we've done this, I would remember to share my screen. So just before we move forward, there's our email. If you have any questions, there's our email on the screen. There are 2 ways to get in touch with us. Third Thursdays with Tom and Tim at gmail.com or TT with TAT at gmail.com.
And we solicit emails, we solicit ideas, suggestions for topics maybe, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So here's Emma Dusenberry.
Well, in 1936, Arkansas celebrated its centennial, and it was a pretty big celebration for a poor state trying to work its way out of the Depression. And there was a musical component to that celebration back in 36, and they were sensitive to Arkansas music. And so someone brought to the attention of the organizers Emma Dusenberry, living in absolute abject poverty west of Mena in Polk County, not too far from the Oklahoma border. And the people kept saying she has this remarkable repertoire of folk songs, which she carries in her head. Emma is blind. And that is one of the reasons for the abject poverty. Here you see her with her daughter, Ora. She became her husband had some physical problems resulting from an accident, I believe it was unable to work. They ended up living in this house over near Mena, and all of a sudden people came to see them. Florence Powell, who was director of our symphony at that time, I'm not quite sure, it might have been called the Little Rock
Symphony at that time.
Yeah, Florence Powell went over and recorded her. She became the people at the Library of Congress, Alan Lomax and others, became aware of her and visited her and taped her performing. As a matter of fact, at the Library of Congress today, you can see, you can listen to 116 of her songs. Remember, these were all from memory. She had no ability to read lyrics, so she memorized everything, and it was just a remarkable thing to come out of it. She was visited by Vance Randolph and John Gould Fletcher. John Gould Fletcher is one of the people who helped bring her to the attention of other people. I have heard her recordings of her music, and it's really amazing to think that this woman who had been through so much was such a treasure, and yet she lived in such incredible circumstances. She was buried, she died in 1941, was buried next to her husband in a pauper cemetery. Her grave is identified, though. They misspell her name, which probably indicates that the tombstone was probably put up after a good while after her death. If we have time, I'd like to read this introduction. Bob Cochran, who is an English professor and sort of a folklorist and really knowledgeable about Arkansas music, he wrote an article on Emma for the Arkansas Historical Quarterly, and I'm going to read this opening paragraph just to give you an idea of the circumstances. Her life is a great saga, one of our state's best, but thus far it has been told only in brief hints and glimpses. Ever since the day when I heard for the first time, but not the last, this song, sung in a leaky roofed, decaying cabin by an old, blind, and illiterate woman dressed in flour sack clothes, whose repertoire consisted of nearly 100 such ballads, I too have regarded the Ozarks as a magic land. This is John Gould Fletcher writing here. He has her in the Ozarks, which is not the case. Mena is in the Ouachitas, not the Ozarks. but old, blind, and illiterate. That's how John Gould Fletcher described her. And the situation gets pretty rough. On one occasion, they were almost evicted during a sleet storm. And she said something like, you would put us out in the cold, out in this howling wind under a tree. It was a really sad situation. But she has, since this article was written, she has gotten quite a bit of attention and is better known. She is not well known, though, among the general public in Arkansas.
I imagine there were a lot of people in Arkansas in the 20s and 30s, and probably still today, who are like Emma Dusenberry, maybe not so much in poverty or blind, but who have these wonderful libraries in their mind of songs and have a singing voice and have this, that they can, sing all these songs that they have in their mind, who remain undiscovered.
Well, we're not talking about Joan Baez here. We're talking about her voice might not be the thing that would make her important. It was this songs that she had carried with her, which she carried with her all of her life.
I read one when I was doing research on Emma Dusenberry. I read that there's one song about Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation that's her singing that. That's the only time they've ever heard any other traditional singer sing that song. So,
which makes it that much more significant,
right? Well, I think, of course, one of the more significant musicians to come out of Arkansas has to be Florence Prize.
Yes, and you and I have a sort of a post facto relationship with her in a way. Florence Prize was the preeminent Black female American composer for much of for the first half of the 20th century, or a goodly part of that. A native of Little Rock, married an interesting husband who was a law partner of Scipio Jones. And you and I helped play a role in saving her archives.
Mm-hmm. Well, she was born here in Little Rock, and her father was interesting. Her parents were interesting in their own rights, because her father was a Black dentist in Little Rock in the early 1900s and saw both Black and white patients. And then her mother was an educator.
Yeah. What was Dr. Smith's name?
James H. Smith.
James H. Smith, her father. He was a fascinating man, and it's too bad that we don't have more information about him. He was an inventor and a painter. I have seen one example of his art, and I thought it was really something. Anyhow, that's Florence's father, a dentist here in Little Rock. He had come from Chicago, moved to Little Rock after the Great Fire.
And Florence, his daughter, ended back up in Chicago after 1927 lynching here in Little Rock. She and her family moved to Chicago, and that's where she really flourished. And she was the first African-American woman to have her composition played by a major
American orchestra.
Right. And interestingly, the first African-American male to have his compositions performed by a symphony or orchestra was from Little Rock as well, like William Grant Still. But
it's a remarkable fact about Arkansas history that these two people were products of Little Rock and the public schools here. They both studied under Mrs. Charlotte Stevens, who was this amazing educator in her own right. Anyhow, Tim, let's tell people that this photograph right here was one that we found when we went up to near Chicago, which we're going to tell you about here in just a minute.
So so this photograph, Florence is on the right. She might be on the right side of the screen. Her young daughter, one of her daughters, is standing in front of her, and her husband Thomas is in back in the middle, and then their son Thomas is in the front. We don't know who the other people in this photograph is. But after she moved to Chicago, she had success. Florence died in 1953. And after her death, her house was abandoned, and all these compositions that people knew about were considered lost. And so in 2010, Tom and I, we were both at the University of Arkansas. We got a call from a couple in St. Anne, Illinois, saying that they had bought the Florence Prize house, and then there were these manuscripts in there. And so we went up to Chicago, the Chicago area, Chicagoland, I think is what they call it. And
boy, it was a cold trip.
Cold.
It snowed on us for much of the way. The people at the university couldn't imagine why we were driving up there. Why don't you just fly? Well, we hoped to be able to pick up and find things and bring them home with us, and we wanted to be prepared.
Yeah,
it was a cold day, and we've like to have never found the place in St. Anne, which is south of Chicago.
It's near Kankakee, Illinois.
Yeah, and it's the site. Florence had bought a summer house on the site of this black resort south of the city. They had it was sort of a country club. They had a golf course, and people had summer houses, weekend houses out there, and some people just lived out there.
The boxer Joe Louis had a home in that area, and the people who called us actually lived in the home of Joe Louis, the former home of
the
Joe
Gatwoods,
Louis.
whom we're going to show you a picture of here in a minute, lived in the Joe Louis home, which had been restored.
They were in the process of restoring.
Yeah, they were working on it. And anyhow, we found them, and we visited with them. Then we walked over to where her house was. The Gatwoods had purchased this whole area, which had been abandoned for a long time. It had very little usable stuff on it. They had bought it, I think, for taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And but they knew that there was something in this house that might be useful. Originally, when they bought it, her grand piano was still in it.
So this is a photo of Florence in her house in St. Anne, and I want you to notice the curtains in the back. And so this is the exterior of the house when she lived there in the 1940s and 50s. And then when we went there in 2010, this was the state of it. And so we walked into this house, and this is what we were greeted. And you can't really tell, but the curtains on the window those are the same curtains that were in that previous photo.
There's obviously a story here about some sort of neglect, family neglect, heritage neglect. I don't know what it was. They had locked this place up, walked away from it, and never returned. When the Gatwoods bought the place, her piano, the one you saw her at, that was in this room, between the time they bought the place and the time they went over there to investigate it, someone had come in and stolen her grand piano. Of course, it would not have been usable because it had been abandoned. There were holes in the roof. You could see daylight everywhere. It's a miracle because the house had been vandalized and her papers had been scattered across the floor.
And it had been open to the elements. There was a hole in the roof where a tree had fallen on it. The floors had collapsed, and it's a wonder. And the papers, as Tom mentioned, been scattered around. So it's a wonder that anything survived. But I think we ended up finding about 600, 700 compositions. Some, as I mentioned, previously unknown, or some that had been considered lost. And so
or different versions of
of
compositions.
them. Yeah.
Also. When we got there, just as a little aside, working as archivists as we were at the University of Arkansas Special Collections Department. Professionally, we see things happen all the time where collections are lost, or collections are burned by insecure heirs to family, you know. But when we walked up on the porch of that house that day, our hearts sank because there was a snow shovel on the front porch. And what did that snow shovel tell us? It told us somebody had been in there shoveling up papers. And indeed, they had. Here is the family, Daryl and Vicki Gatwood with their foster daughter. This is the first time that we saw them. Unfortunately, we did not know it at the time this picture was taken, but Daryl was sick and only had a few months to live. We paid a generous price for the papers, and I am glad that we did that because I'm sure it helped this family out a great deal.
The Florence Prize story deserves a whole lot more time than we're able to give it today, but we have to move on because of time constraints. And we're going to talk a little bit about Barbara Hendricks, another musician from Arkansas. She's an internationally recognized soprano. She was born in Stevens. You know what county Stevens is in?
I'm going to guess that it's Washita County.
You are correct. Yes, Washita County.
There's an interesting why was she born in Stevens? Her father was an AME minister, M.L. Hendricks. I knew him. I met her back when she looked very much like this young woman on the left there. Anyhow, she was born in Stevens. She went to Horace Mann High School here in Little Rock. She studied music locally, and she was involved in several musical efforts. She worked with Art Porter Sr., who was teaching at that time. She took degrees in math and chemistry, and then she studied at Juilliard and completed her work there. She performed at Clinton's first presidential inauguration. So there were two Black Arkansans who were in Clinton's inauguration, his first inauguration. Who were they? Besides Barbara Hendricks.
Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou, right. Mm-hmm. I knew her father. He ran for the legislature back in the late 60s, early 70s. One of the first black men to run for the legislature in the 20th century. He was defeated, unfortunately, at that time.
Well, unfortunately, we have to move on. I think all of these folks deserve longer presentations, but we're glad to have our guest here today, Charley Sandage of Mountain View. And he is a singer and songwriter, not just of traditional songs, but also ones that he writes himself about on Arkansas history. He's done a lot of songs on topics on Arkansas history.
There's no way that we can properly identify Charley Sandage. It would take hours to properly introduce him. Charley is so knowledgeable and so experienced, but most important of all, he's just a wonderful guy, and he is my friend. And he agreed recently to speak at my funeral. And he said he might even play a tune or two at my funeral.
Well, I think Charley's my friend too, not just yours. But Charley, we're glad to have you here. And tell us a little bit about your work and what you're working on now, what you've done in the past, and just give us an overview of your work.
Let me say before we go further, though, that Charley has had a long career in education. He and his wife, Vicki, live in a wonderful home up in overlooking the White River, not too far north of Mountain View, but I think over in Izard County. Charley, that's just about as much time as we can give you, and it's inadequate, but we're glad to have you with us today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to join you guys. And I'll just note that agreement was a mutual thing with Tom. Whichever one of us is still hanging around when the occasion arises.
But I can't sing.
Well, I don't. Maybe that'll be your
debut.
triangle
at your funeral.
Okay. Just very little about myself. And then there were two areas, as we agreed earlier, that I would like to talk about. And so you guys will have to watch me time-wise, because unlike the two of you, I tend to ramble occasionally. Basically, an educator one way or another, and spent some time at AETN, and very early, relevant to the first thing I want to talk about, I've been associated with the Ozark Folk Center either directly or indirectly since its opening back in '73. And I will mention something about my website. Let me just do that really quickly now. Tim shot of me a minute ago contained my website, but not my email address. And since it's a small group, I want to recite that for you. CV, that's Charlie Vicky, CV Sandage @gmail. And I give you that so that if you want to go to my website, rather than take time to tell you how to navigate to where you can find some songs, email me and I'll tell you how to navigate to those things on the website. There are at least 3 CDs that are traditional, and then there is the Arkansas Stories group that are those historical songs, and one of those is a song about Emma Dusenberry, Ollie Gilbert, and Almeda Riddle. And Tim, you might just go ahead and put Almeda up for folks to look at. Well, I'll make this one additional comment, Tom, about Emma. Emma was actually born in North Georgia, and so and migrated to Arkansas, as did so much of what we consider the Appalachian Ozark traditional music. So she's sort of emblematic of that. And she did live in Marion County for a while, which was in the Ozarks, but she wound up over in Polk County.
You're talking about Emma.
In the Mena area. Almeda, I'll just mention a little bit of a personal connection with her. When I came here to Mountain View in '73 to be part of the staff at the Ozark Folk Center, they were buzzing about, Almeda Riddle is coming. And I couldn't wait to meet the famous Almeda Riddle. Even by that time, I believe she had performed at Newport Folk Festival and Harvard and Berkeley and all over. She showed up and I thought, oh, that's Sister Riddle. She grew up in a church that was pastored by a great uncle of mine. And our family had moved down to Hot Spring County, but they would talk about, we're going to go up home this coming weekend and we'll go to this church. And so I knew her as part of that congregation, Primitive Baptist, singing unaccompanied shape note traditional music. And I had not put it together. That's the famous Almeda Riddle. But her repertoire, much like Emma's, and much like Ollie Gilbert, also here, just ran into the hundreds and hundreds of the traditional ballads. In those early days at the Folk Center, I had opportunity to meet the real genuine, Ozark traditional performers, in addition to Jimmy Driftwood. One that you have a shot of, Tim, is Seth Mize. And Seth, there you go. I'll just note, my mother took up painting when she was in her 40s, and I was not around home at the time, and she was telling me about, she found this wonderful picture of this old fiddler and did a painting of it. And this is a shot I took a couple of days ago of that painting, which I have. And when I finally visited and saw it, I had to kind of laugh, because that was Seth Mize. And she had gotten it from a book that I'd forgotten that I'd given her, photographs of folks like Seth from up here. he was known, he was part of a group that included Book Miller Shannon and Lonnie Avey and Leslie Booger Walls. And he was noted, very small guy. He would usually, in the middle of a fiddle tune, break into step dancing while he was fiddling, which of course always excited the audience. But it was my very great privilege to kind of learn directly from and sort of sit at the feet of people like this. And there's a bit of a phenomenon connected with that. A lot of people like me came here in this area in those early days, and it was some of us, to put it that way, more than necessarily descendants of the same family, although there were families who carried on through the generation since then. We're going on 50 years as of next year well, it'll be 23, the 50th anniversary of the Folk Center. But for a while, it was my friends, people like the Harmony Group and Kay Thomas and others, who sort of came in from off, as they say, and then found ourselves kind of teaching next generation down from families like Seth's and others. And that's kind of one of the way the tradition's been carried on. I would say that I refer to it as a particularly deep well around here, around the Stone County area. There are pockets like this all over the Missouri and Arkansas Ozarks of communities with a very, very rich traditional music tradition. So much so, Tim, in that CD cover from the Alan Lomax thing, in 59 and 60, Alan Lomax, of a multi-generational folklore collection family, made his southern journey, starting all the way from Atlantic coast, Carolinas, and down through Georgia, Mississippi, all the way over into Texas. Later, his collection was produced digitally and released on CDs. There are 13 volumes, and volume 7 is all from right around this area. That person pictured there, by the way, is Neil Morris, Jimmy Driftwood's daddy. And Jimmy sort of guided Lomax around and told him who he needed to interview and record and so forth. And Almeida and Ollie and Neil and Book Miller Shannon, the banjo player, and on like that appear on volume 7 of Alan Lomax's Southern Journey collection. Just a little bit more about the idea of Arkansas traditional. First off, I refer to traditional rather than folk. It's the Ozark Folk Center, but folk is a term almost without a meaning. When you have folk rock and when you have almost anybody with a guitar acoustic instrument and singing getting referred to as folk, it almost has no meaning. Strictly speaking, traditional refers to oral tradition, having been passed down generation to generation personally through families or neighbors or whatever. And it would be hard to think of any more or less current piece ever being traditional, but I would say that something that could be written now might, even though it's spread by media and whatever, could become so much a part of the known repertoire and really last that way over time, that it could conceivably be referred to as traditional in that sense. But that's just a distinction I make. Another general comment: that kind of music, this Ozark traditional, was certainly not just confined to the Ozarks part of Arkansas. The old time string band, the balladry, that was part of early tradition traditional music in Arkansas all over the state. And that was not just handed down through white folks up in the mountains or British Isle heritage folks up in the mountains. People think of it that way. But by the time that tradition arrived in frontier Arkansas, put it that way, there were German influences, there were French influences, there absolutely were, well, a Scandinavian influence is the fact that the mountain dulcimer was based on a Scandinavian instrument. And the banjo, and I want to really make a point of this, African influence in two ways. The banjo is essentially an African instrument. But not only that, the old-time string band music was practiced from its beginning, what we would identify that way, as much by Black families as by white families. And that's an awareness that is being nurtured these days. And people are beginning to get a hint of that. One particular hint, and keep an eye on me because I want to talk about that other area, but I'll mention this. One of my Arkansas Story songs, Tom, I know you're familiar with the Beautiful Sally song,
Right.
about a slave girl, and it's based on a book by Dr. Ruth Polk Patterson, a Little Rock educator and school district administrator who was responsible for the first Black studies introduced into Little Rock Public School curriculum, wrote a family history called The Seed of Sally Gooden. And this was her ancestor, Sally, from which her people sprang. And the Sally Gooden, I wondered how in the world that the name, her name was Sally, the progenitor, but Sally Gooden is the name of an old-time fiddle tune. Every old-time fiddler knows Sally Gooden. How did that get connected? Well, the family somehow made the connection, but the reason they were aware of it is, as it turns out, if you read that book, The Seed of Sally Gooden, in that family were old-time string band musicians. It was a very strong part of that family's stories. So somehow in that family lore, the Sally Gooden got attached to their ancestor Sally, which makes, I think, my point that what we think of and what most people think of, old-time string band music, a bunch of old white hillbillies, it was as much Black tradition as it was white tradition. Okay, I'm going to make a jump if I may. I wanted to say something about Johnny Cash, and in particular, in light of the fact, some people might wonder why in the world did we wind up designating Johnny Cash to be one of our emblems in the form of being one of the new entries in the statuary in the US Capitol, along, of course, with Daisy Bates. He was just an old country singer, right? What's so special? Well, I think that Johnny Cash deserves a deeper look. And the reason I do has to do with why he might really be emblematic of a lot of things that is important about Arkansas. And you would have to look at him in the context of his songwriting as much as his performance. Everybody knows a few, well, everybody. Most people know some songs of Johnny Cash's, and they know that he was part of that bunch that created rockabilly over at Sun Records and those kinds of things. And some folks may have seen the I Walk the Line film, and about his personal struggles and all that sort of thing. But he was deeply, deeply influenced by actually growing up. He was born in Kingsland, but his growing up years were up at the Dias Colony, which was one of those Roosevelt Farm Service Administration experiments in which they provided cotton acreage to folks like that family and gave them sort of a fresh chance and those kinds of things. Johnny knew about the struggles. He knew about having it hard. And he wrote about those kinds of things, and it influenced his writing for his whole career. When he got on contract with Columbia, one of the first things that he just kind of badgered them into doing at Columbia, they didn't want to do it, but he released an album called Ride This Train. And that's not one of his best known pieces of music out there. He wrote the songs for it, most of them. And it's kind of a travelogue, ride this train to this place and look at this person. And it was about common folks, about the people who did the hard work, the people who, you know, were behind whatever this well-known piece at this place and this place and this place. And that thematically was the kind of thing that he loved to write about. Later on, almost toward the end of his contract with Columbia, and I think pushing them to do this project was part of why it was close to the end of his Columbia contract, was an album called Bitter Tears, which was all about the Native American experience, as we like to call it these days. I had the opportunity, here's a little ramble, when I was doing some work for Historic Arkansas Museum, and they were starting to plan the museum that's now on the third floor about Arkansas's Native Americans. I had a chance to meet folks from the Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw nations. And I found out they kind of laughed about our Native American, First American labels. As a collective group, they call themselves Indians. And then they'll refer to Quapaw and so forth. So anyway, the Bitter Tears was about the Indian experience, to put it that way. The best known out of it was the Ira Hayes ballad, but there's so much more in that Bitter Tears album. And that was the kind of thing, along with Prisoners and just the common man in general. That was the kind of thing that Johnny Cash wrote about, cared about. And he talked about that about himself in one of his fairly known late songs called The Man in Black. It was his explanation of why he calls himself the Man in Black. And I would also say that in some of the songs that he wrote, there's I think some really good, insightful poetry in his song lyrics. And then if you want to delve in a little bit to Johnny Cash, pay some attention to the very last set of recordings of his, which Rick Rubin, who had nothing to do with country, talked Johnny into just some simple sit down with your guitar and let's do some recordings. And they were released as American Recordings, I think was the title of the series. And just
We lose him.
the songs
We
that
may
he
have lost Charley.
Sorry? Did somebody, do you all have me? Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I heard Lost Charley in there somewhere. The songs he selected and just the way, I mean, you heard his age and you heard his struggles and everything. It's a remarkable series of recordings and one well worth listening to. Now, I'm gonna turn the floor.
Charlie, your signal's going in and out, but we're nearing where we need to start wrapping up. But I will say that those CDs that Johnny Cash made towards the end of his life,
Yeah.
they're really something. And his song "Hurt," originally done by 9 Inch Nails,
Yeah,
which is, if you
not
know,
country exactly.
yeah, 9 Inch Nails is definitely not country.
Yeah,
But that's a masterpiece in my mind, is that song. But
absolutely, absolutely. Do, do I have long enough just to read a little bit of a couple of lines from one of his songs?
sure.
Do we have time to do that? Yeah, you know, the rockabilly and the country image and all of this sort of thing, you would not necessarily expect, and I'm just going to extract a couple of lines out of a song of his called Flesh and Blood. He goes through talking about a day in which he's sort of wandering around observing things in nature. Beside a singing mountain stream where the willow grew, da-da-da-da. And farther down in that verse, I braided twigs of willows, made a string of buckeye beads. And then he says this, but flesh and blood need flesh and blood, and you're the one I need. That was his approach to a love song. The whole song is just moving as far as I'm concerned. Down toward the end, he goes through this day with that kind of thing. And then he says, so when this day was ended, I was still not satisfied, for I knew everything I touched would wither and would die. And love is all that would remain and grow from all these seed. Mother Nature's quite a lady, but you're the one I need. Flesh and blood need flesh and blood, and you're the one I need. Not necessarily stuff that people might associate with Johnny Cash, the country and hillbilly and song singer.
Mhm, mhm.
Do we have time, Tim, for some questions?
We do have some time for some questions. Gina, have there been any questions coming in? Do you know? Or
No, we don't have any questions yet.
well,
We do
let's open. Let's have
his-
someone ask a question.
I do want Charlie to know we have his website posted on Facebook as well, so people can find his Facebook page,
Good.
as well
Good.
as your third Thursdays. We've got a link to that, so if people have missed any, they can go back and watch those.
Oh, great.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll just say this. If you click on the songs, you get to a page with a lot of CD albums. Click on that and they open up and you hear the stuff. And send me an email, cvsandage@gmail.com, and I'll explain more about where to find those particular songs you might be interested in.
We have one quick question from Jim. He says, Charlie, tell us about the Arkansas Stories collection.
Oh, gosh, a little over 25 years ago. All right, I'll just a little quick thing about how it started. I was working at ATN, but moved up here to Mountain View. So I had a 2-hour commute for a couple of years. And I decided I would make good use of the time. So I had a little cassette recorder and I thought, I'm going to, if I have ideas about songs to write. And the very first one, I had just happened to read an article in the Van Buren County Historical Quarterly about this fellow walking home at the end of the Civil War. Then I had written that, and I thought, oh, that's kind of fun. Tom, you were at UCA at the time, in charge of the archives there.
Right.
And I would go over at lunchtime and say, hey, Tom, what's another idea for a song like that? It turned into what's now a well over 25-year project. There are 3 CDs out there with the group Harmony from here in Mountain View doing the performance. And it's generated who knows how many concerts, some a little bit of programming that was carried on all 3 of Arkansas's NPR stations, and at least one ATN piece that I can remember, and some curriculum stuff. And once again, if you want to know more about that, drop me a note, cvsandage@gmail. But that project shaped stuff that I'm still deeply involved in. Projects that I have going on now, right now, longer form, have grown out of that experience. And that is sort of what turned me into being kind of a little bit of a amateur Arkansas historian over the 25 years of trying to do research for those songs.
Charley is extremely productive. I read a lot of stuff for him that he's written, and right now he is taking up so much of my time on one of his projects. It's great. I'm enjoying it immensely, and I think it'll be a fine product. The point I'm making there, though, is Charley, is that you've done so many things through the years, so many different approaches to Arkansas history, and you have you've produced a lot of stuff that people really don't know about, and these the Arkansas Studies work that you did with Jack Bennett and others in his company, it was really, really quite remarkable stuff, and I wish more people were familiar with it.
I do appreciate that, Tom, and I would just say this: poking around, asking questions, I have found universally across the community, Arkansas history community, which over that 20 plus years of my experience has grown immensely. It was a relatively small community back then. And I have found every one of these folks that I would call with a question to just open up and just pour it out there. But I will have to say, time and time and time again, my go-to Arkansas historian has been Tom Dillard.
Well, y'all have given us so much to think about. I'm just still amazed at the incredible story of you finding and rescuing those documents and compositions from Florence Price's home. I hadn't thought about Barbara Hendricks in a long time. My kids went to Horace Mann. That was good, a reminder, and didn't know about Emma Dusenberry at all. So you've given us lots to think about. Gina has populated this and on Facebook. So if you didn't follow all of the links to Charley's page, to Tom and Tim's email, to the Third Thursdays link, to past shows, be sure to check out the Life Quest of Arkansas Facebook page for this program, because all in the comments are all of those links. Thanks, Gina, for being the tech whiz that you are, and for everyone being here. Everyone's nodding and clapping, and we've had lots of great thumbs ups, and they're so glad to have you back. We could be here another hour, though we don't have time.
We
Right
could.
now,
We'll have to do a part 2 sometime.
I know you would definitely will. Please do. I know it's a lot of work, but just hearing the stories and those names have really been inspiring. And Charley, so much to look at. The Arkansas Stories Project. That's a whole other conversation. We've got to have you back. We're just going to have you back at Life Quest. I hope you will. And I will invite you. We'll work on that. So we next are going to talk more about music in our All About Jazz class with Tom Cox. And so I don't want to keep those folks waiting. We're going to get on over to the next Zoom room. But thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank
you, Gina.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is Dent. It was wonderful.
I'm glad you're here, Dent. See lots of heads nodding that I recognize. Thanks, everybody. We'll bring them back, I promise.